Welcome to an experience powered by Pipe TV.
You are now watching Pipe TV.
I said, call your mother. I said, call your preacher. But don't give up. One man, I said he let you down. One man played you wrong. Hi, this is Chanel, and you're watching Pipe TV.
Hey, this is your girl, Miss Tony, and you are watching Pipe TV, where photography Insight Plus magazine comes to life.
Welcome to Pipe TV. I'm Jill Foster, your host.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to Pipe TV. I'm your host, Little Nat.
Welcome to Pipe TV. I'm your host, Marcy Novella.
Hello, you're watching Pipe TV, and we're on stage with Tanja. Hello, you're watching Pipe TV, and we're on stage with Tanja. Today I have the pleasure of introducing to you all Angeline Butler. She is a teaching performing artist, but she's much more than that. And she is here to tell us all about Angeline Butler.
What do you want to know about Angeline Butler?
What I want to know about Angeline Butler is, you said you grew up in the South during segregation.
Absolutely.
What was life like for you back then?
Well, first of all, my parents and my family. My father was a principal of an elementary school, the Crossroads Elementary School. He was pastor of the Daughter Zion and the Pleasant Grove Baptist Church. And my mother taught second grade. And we all, the girls that you see here, we all were educated through the Crossroads Elementary School at the corner of 601 Highway and Garner's Ferry Road in South Carolina. Now, this sister grew up to be the most important educator there ever was in South Carolina. She was the first black superintendent of the Richland County Schools at Columbia, South Carolina, which is the capital. Now, that's a very big honor back in segregated days. Okay.
I bet.
Of course, it was after the 54 decision.
Okay.
Okay. But South Carolina was very slow to desegregate. Maybe they didn't desegregate their schools up until like 1974, as opposed to 1954 when the Supreme Court acted on it. Okay.
Okay.
They were always, running to the courts and giving a reason as to why they would not desegregate and states' rights and all of that, okay? So the other sisters are all educators. Each one of us were graduated from elementary school, then we went to high schools, and in my case, my parents sent me to the city school for high school because they felt I could get a better education than was offered me in Eastover, South Carolina.
Wow.
And so I went to C.A. Johnson High School. I was barely of age. They had to put my age back. Went to high school at 11. Okay.
Wow. That's impressive.
Well, it's because the parents were school teachers. They took us in the summer. They took us in the winter. And so we made 2 grades a year. So we were early. It wasn't that we were so smart. We were just early, okay? And that happened to all of my sisters. Mary became the first black assistant principal in an all-white school.
Wow.
In her day. These sisters of mine, Mildred Elaine Shirley, wonderful mathematician. She retired from the Los Angeles County Schools. Emma Margaret became the first, or nearly the first, Pan American airline stewardess.
Wow.
And because of her, my mother was able to go around the world.
Nice.
Yeah, and I was able to go I was able to go to Denmark. I went to Ireland, and I stayed there for a while. And then I also went to the Soviet Union just as they were changing it and allowing us as black people to go there. And we went on those, 20% discounts, which was really great. And then my sister, Dolores, she was married to a young man that she met at Howard University, and they were both biologists. And he, of course, died several years ago, but she still lives now in Atlanta.
Okay.
So that's my family, okay?
I
Reverend
see.
and Mrs.
Very
Butler.
impressive.
And we grew up on a 50-acre farm, so I picked a lot of cotton.
Wow.
Okay, pulled a lot of fodder, fed a lot of pigs, and we walked to school, up to 7 miles sometimes to go to school. So that's where my childhood was. We were country girls. Maybe that's why we're living so. All my sisters are alive, and they're all still walking.
Wow.
Isn't that amazing?
It is. It's very impressive.
Now, I'm going to be 84 years old in September. Mary is just 10 months younger than me.
I'm speechless.
And they're all, blessed with, pretty good health. And I think it's because we grew up in the country.
Yeah.
Around trees and around nature, and we had gardens and those kinds of things.
Well, that's a very impressive family history there, and you're very proud of your family, and I'm sure they're very proud of you.
Well, I'm very proud of Reverend and Mrs. Butler simply because I didn't say I'm adopted in the family at 12 days old.
Okay.
My mother was a young lady at 17 when she was pregnant, and she had to go back to school, so her father allowed her to have me. They placed me with Reverend and Mrs. Butler, who didn't have children for 3 years. They were married. And then boom, 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 they had 5 girls. Oh. So I'm very lucky to have been brought up by Reverend Isaac Bartley Butler, who has been honored by the South Carolina State House of Representatives several times, and Mrs. Butler as well. Okay.
So a family full of educators, and I see that you are an adjunct lecturer of Africana Studies at John Jay College?
Right. Well, if you brought up in a family like that,
yes,
education is going to be a major part of your life. And I'm a performing artist first. I was lucky enough, after going through the civil rights movement of the 60s, which I was one of the student leaders in 1960s with John Lewis, Marion Barry, James Bevel, Bernard Lafayette, and all of those people, I won a scholarship to Juilliard in the middle of that.
Right, so I was going to ask you that. You here with the family, you picking cotton, and you're doing all these things that country gals do.
Right.
When did you leave there to go to college? So you left there and went where?
I went to college at 15. I went to Fisk University in Nashville. And at Fisk, I wasn't very happy being there the first year because the people were very snobbish and very light-skinned and very prejudiced, the student body. Yeah. I don't think they had a black Miss Fisk until my senior year, okay?
Wow.
But I went to Fisk, and there were a number of people that were very attracted to the work that I did. One was the conductor of the Jubilee Singers, Dr. John Work. He got a hold of me, and he understood my ears and my musicality, and he saw in me things that I never saw in myself. And it was because of his insistence that I auditioned for Juilliard after Fisk, and on 3 songs of Shakespeare by Stravinsky, which is what I auditioned with, I won a scholarship to Juilliard School of Music. I didn't even know what that was before I went to audition for it. I didn't know it was the top music school in the country.
So you're teaching performing artists, and so what led you to marry the civil rights movement with your artistry?
Well, the point is that Martin Luther King came to our school in my second year of college for a spring festival. And Dr. Stephen J. Wright, who was what I call our first black-complected president of Fisk University, he liked me too, he and his wife. And I used to plant flowers with Dr. Wright's wife, because I was a country girl, right? And so Dr. Work liked me, and Dr. Stephen J. Wright, the president. So he brought Martin Luther King to Fisk for our spring festival, and he introduced him as the person that he saw would be in the leadership of our country in the years to come. And I was lucky enough, because the Wrights like me. Dr. Wright assigned Martin Luther King to me for about an hour, and I took him to the art gallery at Fisk and showed him around. And of course, he explained to me what happened in Montgomery while I was explaining to him what was happening with the art in the Fisk University gallery. We had Aaron Douglas and all those wonderful artists. And so that was my first meeting with Martin Luther King. And then I took him back over to Dr. Wright's house, where he was the guest and he was staying. And 1 year later, I was in jail.
Wow. Way to go.
Leading the Nashville movement. February 27th, 106 of us got arrested, okay? But we were training in nonviolence since 1959 with Reverend Jim Lawson, Reverend C.T. Vivian, Reverend Metz Rollins, Reverend... let's see, I don't want to forget the head of the Nashville Christian Leadership Conference. It's escaping me right now. But we were training in Nashville for the nonviolent, well, I guess what Jim Lawson was, the nonviolent demonstrations that we would bring about.
Well, I'm going to want to hear some more about that, but we're going to take a quick break. Again, you're watching Pipe TV, and you're on stage with Tanja. We'll be right back with Miss Angeline Butler. Welcome back. Again, you're watching Pipe TV, and we're on stage with Tanja. We have Miss Angeline Butler back in the studio, and we're going to finish our conversation with her before we fast forward into her life as a performing artist, because she's not only just an academia, she's also an artist. But I'm particularly interested, though, you mentioned your time with Martin Luther King during his early years, and you said something about training in nonviolence.
Yes.
Can you give us an idea of what that means when you say training someone in nonviolence?
Well, in walks Jim Lawson, who just died in July at 95 years old, Reverend James Morris Lawson, Jr. In walked Jim Lawson as the first black student ever admitted to the Vanderbilt Divinity School. And Kelly Miller Smith, whose name I couldn't remember in the last segment, who was head of the Nashville Christian Leadership Conference, which was affiliated with the Southern Leadership Conference. And he was having community workshops in nonviolence before Jim Lawson arrived in town. And now that Jim Lawson was in town, the young graduate student, Dr. and Mrs. Fuson from Fisk University took a group of us who usually hang out at their house on like Friday nights, okay? They took us down to Kelly Miller Smith's church to see this first night with Jim Lawson. We didn't know who Jim Lawson was, but they had told us about him. He'd already spent, he had a 2-year sentence in federal penitentiary for refusing to go to the military. He served 13 months of that time, And then he went to Oberlin College for graduate school, and then he met Martin Luther King there. And Martin Luther King told him that we need a person like you to come south. Because Jim had already been a Methodist missionary, and he'd studied Gandhi, and he'd gone to India as a Methodist minister, missionary. So Jim transferred to Vanderbilt and now took over the workshops. And I'm going to tell you something, it was the most wonderful experience that first night, seeing this young man speak. He was very different from the regular Baptist ministers, who always shouting ups and down and very, preaching style and the whole number and very powerful. He was quiet. He was quiet, very young, very direct. And he was talking about Mahatma Gandhi, Thoreau, and he was talking about what happened in Alabama, and basically how King and Rosa Parks and E.D. Nixon, let's not forget him, because E.D. Nixon is even more important in Montgomery than Martin Luther King, because he headed the NAACP, and that's where Rosa Parks was working at the time that she elected to stay on that bus in 1955. Mm. I do have a good memory.
Yes, you do. So the nonviolence training was what?
The nonviolent training was we go once a week on Tuesdays, and we would role play. So those ministers who had more experience than we did, because they've been sitting in and being on buses for years, it's just that they never really gained the national notoriety that the students did. Because thousands of us, once we snowballed, we went to jail like thousands of us, okay? Couldn't help but put us all on every newspaper and everything, okay? So, but those guys had a lot of experience. So they would get behind us, and can I get up?
Sure.
And let's say you were me, okay? So they would come, they would stand behind us, and they would push us out of the chair. They would hit us. They would, pretend to spit on us, and they would take us through what white people might do if you were sitting at a lunch counter.
Right.
And then, we had to give our reaction in the workshop. And then Jim would talk to us because somebody said, I felt like I want to hit him back. And Jim would tell us why we couldn't hit him back. And how we had to maintain a level of discipline. And there was practice sessions every Tuesday night. And they finally moved those practice sessions from Kelly Miller Smith's church downtown Nashville, which was about 4 miles away from campus, to the Clark Memorial Baptist Church, which was about 3 blocks away from Fisk campus. And that made it easy for the students at Tennessee State Agricultural and Industrial Institute to come there, and also the students from American Baptist Theological Seminary. So now we had Tuesday nights that were easier to get to, and now more students could participate. And we took ourselves through this every single week. And then on the weekend, we would do test sessions where we would go in small groups down to different lunch counters. And then when they threatened to arrest us, we'd leave because we weren't ready for that. But we'd go back. So if somebody spat on us or pulled us off or beat us up, we knew we couldn't fight back. But we'd go back to the workshops, and Jim would ask us, well, how did you feel when that was happening, and he wasn't just interested in the person that was being beat, but also what's the reaction to the people that are on the counter, because we can't turn around and notice it. We can't come to his defense. And so we had to go back and discuss that, and then they would criticize our behavior. So that went on for 1959, and then finally February 1st, the students from Greensboro, North Carolina, those 4 guys, they staged a sit-in at the Woolworths counter because they were going off to shipping them off to Vietnam or whatever was going on. And they said, well, gee, I might lose my life. Why can't I go downtown and have hamburger or soda or something like that, you know, and so that's what they did. And they got national attention that day. Those are our ROTC guys. Anyway, they had national attention, and then the next day they took about 25 students with them, and they sat all over the place in Greensboro. And then they didn't do anything. They didn't have nonviolent training. They didn't have a pre-organization the way we had in Nashville. So Nashville students said, wait a minute, let's not let that die on. You know, we've been out there testing. It's now time for us to put, 200 or 300 students out. So that next weekend we put about 200 students.
You were one of the organizers.
Yeah, I'm one of the organizers.
Yeah.
One of the 6 organizers at that point. And we organized and went in small groups and approached all of these different places. And they let us sit there. You know, we were heckled and all of that, but they didn't threaten to arrest us. So then that next weekend we went back, had about 150 more students. Same thing happened. They didn't threaten us. But the next week, the chief of police called Jim Lawson and C.T. Vivian and Kelly Miller Smith, tell them students if they come downtown to Nashville today, they will be arrested. Wow. And now we had a major decision to make. What did that mean, getting arrested? Because John Lewis was from Georgia. James Bevel was from Mississippi. Angeline Butler was from South Carolina. And Bernard Lafayette was from Alabama. KKK only needs to make a call. They can burn down your father's school. They burn down your house. They can do all kinds of things. So, what happened? We spent hours on the morning of February 27th, and now there were 15 of us in that room, the Central Committee. And we were discussing it and weighing all of the things, and eventually we had to take a vote because we couldn't come to consensus about it. So 7 people voted to go downtown, 6 people voted against it, and 1 person abstained. And we took that back upstairs, and this morning we don't have 150 students. That morning we have 43 students, something like that. And we had to make them understand what it would mean for them to be arrested and might be expelled from school. That's the first thing. The parents could be affected by KKK. We could have bombings on dormitories. We don't know what's going to happen. But one by one, after we explained it to those students upstairs, they raised their hands one by one to go downtown in Nashville that morning. And then we went in small groups, sneaked into town, quietly, not singing or anything. And then when the students heard back at the campus that we had gotten arrested, they sat in every place they could find a seat. And they arrested 106 of us on February 27th, 1960, till they had no more room in the jail. Okay? So, it's a powerful morning. I used to not be able to talk about that without crying.
Well, we don't want to make you cry.
No, I'm past it now. But anyway, that was the beginning of the major movement, which was the sit-in movement, and then later would become the Freedom Ride movement, and later we would have the March on Washington. All of that grew out of the student movement, and we made constitutional changes to our government. The Civil Rights Act of 1964, and it is the students who brought about the Voting Rights Act of 1965 in Selma.
Wow, that's
John
impressive.
Lewis, the Bloody Sunday in 64.
Right.
And then eventually Martin Luther King joins them, but doesn't cross the bridge. He goes to the edge of the bridge and he kneels and he prays. And the reason he did that wasn't because he was scared. He did that because he and his lawyer had received word from the federal court that was down in Louisiana. They needed a little more time to enact the Civil Rights Act, and they were hoping it wouldn't have another Bloody Sunday out there. to now distract from what they were trying to do. And we got that civil rights, the Voting Rights Act passed.
Very good. Well, you all have heard it. You all have heard it all from Ms. Angeline Butler. You are watching Pipe TV, and we're on stage with Tanja, but don't go anywhere. We'll be back for our panel discussion, and we're going to hear more from Ms. Angeline Butler about her teaching artistry in relation to the sit-in movement. Welcome back. You're watching Pipe TV, and you're on stage with Tanja. So we are back with Ms. Angeline Butler. And now I've been joined by a few other panelists. I'm going to introduce them. So next to Ms. Angeline Butler, we have Anthony Jones. Here we have James Goodwin of the Bare Bones Entertainment. And this lovely lady here is Marcy Novella, the love of our community speaks. She's one of the Pipe TV team members. Thank you all for being here. So, Miss Angeline Butler, I told you that when we came back, we wanted to find out more about you as a teaching artist, also as the performer that you are. So whatever information you could share with us about your life as an entertainer, we'd love to hear it.
Entertainment or no entertainment, I always needed a job. So I feel grateful that I had a lot of skills. And some of the jobs that I had teaching, I really enjoyed. I taught nursery school up in Harlem for a long time. And then I taught in the Guggenheim program, arts to teach reading. And so they would bus the students in after school. I love that job, because we were in these $million mansions, and we had them all to ourselves. My whole class, they run up and down the stairs, and the kids really had a good time. And let's see, and then